Hey everyone, and thanks very much for joining our Monday Mindshare again. And great to see more racing happening as we speak live in Europe and in Australia. Show you some of those results in a second. This particular Monday Mindshare is really a carry-on from something we did a couple of weeks ago, and it was about all-day fat oxidation. And I want to talk about some of the big culprits that stall or take away from the ability for us to easily program start of the day, middle of the day, end of the day in terms of snacks and drinks. They're foods and snacks and drinks that really put a halt to fat oxidation. I'm going to show you what they are. I'm going to show you how to replace them really easily. And it's really simple. As I said, this really came from a discussion a couple of weeks ago we had about one of our athletes, Matt Kerr, and his results. And what we talked about with his amazing rise to highly efficient fat oxidation was things that he was doing in training and also everyday fat oxidation diet. And that's what we want to talk a little bit about today. And interestingly enough, we talked in that last show about two of the Ironman and 70.3 records that Matt took here in 2021. Yesterday, he won again in Queensland and Australia, 70.3. And he's the first athlete for SFuels to go under 4 hours in a half Ironman, 70.3. So congratulations to Matt. So let's talk a little bit about these three culprits that we see consistently in diets that can really affect fat oxidation. And we see it happening through the day, every day, and really causing this problem. And it's not a unique happening in a certain part of the world or a certain culture, etc. We see it all around the world where sugar continues to be just a glut in terms of its consumption through the day. The young and the old and in our middle years, sugar continues to be a problem. And the three areas that we see coming up time and time again is all day sugar sipping. And it comes in the forms of juices, typically highly concentrated juices. Even where you see it says 100%, that doesn't mean that it is purely a full fruit extract. It can be a concentrate with added different forms of sweeteners. Some of them no calorie and some of them are added calorie. And then we see grab and go snacks. And this comes in a myriad of shapes and sizes and textures, etc. But we know what they all are: candies and ice creams and cookies and what have you. And I add to this even white bread. And I'll tell you a little bit about some interesting findings I had when I was in clinical practice on just showing the difference on the assumption of white bread or bread, period, of being a slow digesting carbohydrate to what it really is. And then the last area or group is these cereals that have really been designed for all day consumption. And quite honestly, from a convenience perspective, it's a fairly interesting food to actually have all day long. It's very convenient, and if it's structured right, it can actually provide some really interesting nutrition for the body. Conversely, though, if it's not done right, it clearly creates some problems in terms of increased sugars, stimulating insulin, and of course, then blunting our fat oxidation. So let's take a look at first group, the sugar sipping cases, and what's the problem here? A lot of these, I mean, obviously sodas, it's fairly obvious, but even you'll see in a lot of these juices that they've added fructose, they've added high fructose corn syrup to create that sweetness. There's a high concentration of even just a straight 100% extract, high concentration of fructose. These compounds taken consistently certainly cause a number of problems. Not just the fructose itself, but of course it comes with other forms of sugars. Those other forms of sugars are what's stimulating the insulin and creating that blunted fat oxidation. There's no protein in this, like next to zero. You'll find in a lot of these extracts that they extract the juice and dump the fiber. If you were to take a smoothie of a number of fruits with some other, more fibrous vegetable, that fiber would help certainly in reducing the rapid absorption of glucose out of the digestive system and then into the blood and spiking that blood sugar. And of course, these kind of juices and sodas, etc., have no form of fat in them. So these are, I think, really problematic. There's just a rise and rise of their consumption. And it's just like this constant stream of sugar coming into the blood. And aside from what it's doing on the insulin and blood sugars and fat oxidation, it's in a number of reports just a contributor to actually a more heightened inflammatory situation around the body. And you'll see that most material come out not just in cardiovascular system, etc., but also in the musculoskeletal side. And for athletes, clearly that's a problem. Well, here's 3 ideas to replace that really simply. The first is a more dairy-based, and whether you're using a lactose milk based dairy or you're using another form of dairy, that's fine, your choice. But basically, cocoa, a scoop of Transform, some water and ice, and then add your form of dairy, whether that's milk or cream, etc. And put that in the blender. One way to really add a really nice hit to that is take a half a chili, put it also into the blender, and it creates a really nice smoothie for you. Has a bit of protein, certainly has some fat with the Transform in there. And it's just a great, refreshing, not a high calorie drink at all, depending, of course, if you used a lot of cream versus milk, but generally it's certainly very low in carbohydrate. Second option here, take a handful of raspberries. A handful of raspberries is like, about 5 grams of carbohydrate. It's really not a lot. In fact, it's not even 5 grams of carbohydrate. Add to that some strawberry lemonade or pomegranate acai SFuels Train. Again, 0 to very little carbohydrate in that. Some water and ice, put it in the blender, and there's your probably more liquid, water-like consistency in that. It's not a thick drink and very low carbohydrate. Great thirst quencher. You're going to get some good electrolytes there with the SFuels Train. And then the third one, of course, for all of your green goes out there. Now, by the way, SFuels have attempted several times to actually commercialize, productize a green-based drink. We know they're on the marketplace. We would love to do that. The reality is what happens when you extract the chlorophylls from a fresh plant and then you leave it sit. Try it yourself. Leave it sit, and within 10 minutes, you'll see the color change. And that's not just an observation. That is a chemical reaction that's happening there. You dry that out. This is what happens in a commercial sense. They dry that out, and then they put it into a powder, and apparently that's still good for you. I tell you that it is not. We would be absolutely doing it if you can. Take a handful of baby spinach, some SFuels Train, coconut lime is magic with this. Put it in the blender with some water and ice, mix it up. I promise you, you'll love it. You'll keep coming back to it. It'll be a daily routine for you. If you want to really spice it up again, make it a little different, add some mint leaves to that, you're going to love it. So 3 simple ideas to replace your sodas and juices, get off the sugar routine, and get into some of these that are going to give you great nutrition, going to keep your fat oxidation high. Okay, the second group of foods are these, grab and go snacks, typically confectionery in all of its different forms, candies, baking, ice cream, etc. And like I said, even white refined bread and had in the form of a grab and go sandwich. And the problem with that, what I found in clinical practice, and I demonstrated this with a lot of patients who had a desire for a lot of bread and they wondered why they were spiking blood sugars or putting on weight, etc., you think that you're taking a complex carbohydrate. And if you want to test just how simplified sugar that is in a white bread, take a slice of it, get some of those strips at your local pharmacy. There'll be a urine glucose strip. And what you'll do is take your white bread, have a slice of that, eat it, and then have it in your mouth, swallow it, and then put one of these strips against your tongue, leave it in there for a few seconds and bring it out. And you'll see that the color's changed to what would be a measure or an indicator of high glucose levels. And that has already happened in the mouth before it even gets to the stomach, never alone the small intestine. So these white breads, and a lot of these breads, when you look at the refinement that's happening to the flour, it is pretty much glucose before it even gets to the small intestine, certainly when it gets into the bloodstream. The other aspect too, with a lot of these types of foods, very little protein, very little fiber, and certainly little to no fat. Some of the fats that are in there are also hydrogenated. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. They're a highly inflammatory type of fat, and you certainly want to avoid them. So here's 3 ideas to avoid having to grab those snacks. Make sure you always have some plain yogurt in the fridge, whether that's Greek yogurt, homemade yogurt, whatever. Take 4 tablespoons of it, some SFuels Transform, a handful of berries, some chia seeds and mint leaves. It's just magic. If you want to even spice that with a bit of fruitiness flavor, add some strawberry lemonade, SFuels Train. So with that, you're getting your protein, you're getting your fats, you're going to be avoiding the sugars. There's certainly going to be a nice caloric hit in there for all of you folks who are in training with the fat that's in there. There's going to be a little bit of fiber with the chia seeds and some of those berries. It's a great choice to avoid having, the great grabbing of, some types of ice creams and things like that. Another idea for all of you ice cream and cookie and cake freaks out there who love to grab those things. We all used to be there, by the way. Do the same. Take 4 tablespoons of plain yogurt, add a tablespoon of cocoa, and a scoop of SFuels Transform, and mix all that up together. It's a great way to avoid grabbing ice cream. If you want to really spice it up, and particularly again for the athletes out there in training, you want to obviously increase your caloric load. You want to increase your protein. Tear up into small bite-sized pieces, if you will. SFuels Life Bar, put it in there with it. I guarantee when you start on this, you'll be having a lot more of it. It's really great texture in the mouth. And as I say, it's just a highly nutritious meal for you to take. And this is taking a couple of minutes to put this together. And the last one, one of the things that I would say is that from a philosophy perspective, I don't really subscribe to writing off full food groups. And I say that with the same with grains. And I know I'm very familiar with gluten sensitivities. I'm very familiar with celiac disease and some of those conditions that can be genetic, can be habit-driven. There can be intolerances associated with some of these grains. And if that is the case, clearly this is not an option. And there are many gluten-free options to choose instead of what I'm going to suggest right now. But what I'm going to say is that rather than grab that bread, if you take a crisp bread, and the one that I advise a lot is Ryvita, only because when you look at its makeup from a carbohydrate perspective, a single crisp bread is like 5 grams itself of carbohydrate. It's a complex carbohydrate. There's 3 grams of fiber in there also. It's just a good mix of macro grains. There's a good amount of sodium in that. And then mix that up with a more fatty food on top of that. Classic cheese, obviously butter, high fat hams, etc. is fine. And then if you want to overlay with tomato, salt, what have you, go right ahead. So I just want to kind of bring out the point here that there are absolutely cases where grains are problematic for a lot of people, and avoid them. for those who don't have a problem with them, you can still choose some of these foods and have them in a form that really does not have a large carbohydrate load to it at all. For an athlete in training, 50 grams to 150 grams, taking a 5-gram crisp bread is really not going to be a problem. By adding the cheese and the ham and the things like that, that's what's going to help add the fat to further slow down the absorption of that into the body. And then, some folks, of course, who, typically in a high carb environment where you wouldn't care so much about what you would put on top of something like this, but you would put a jam spread, etc. Well, here's a simple way to create a jam without all the carbohydrate. Take a handful, 5 or 6 cranberries, mix in some teaspoon of SFuels Transform, and mix it up and crunch it up with a pestle or mortar into a jam. Very little carbohydrate, and you can spread that on top of your soft cheese, on top of the Rivita. You're going to love that. A great way to avoid high carbohydrate meals, but there is a lot of nutrition that is found in these grains. You just have to be selective. They need to be whole, and it's the amount we have that is typically problematic. Okay, the third pillar I talked about was really around these everyday cereals. And if I can talk a little bit about this for a second before I jump into this, and that is that the cereal format as it relates to boxed cereal is designed in such a way that highly convenient, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. We should all shoot for that. The problem is that, again, the grains two things have happened to a lot of the processing in a boxed cereal. Firstly, the grains themselves have been highly refined. And you'll notice that when a bubbled rice or a flaked corn, these things have been processed so much that when you eat it, you'll see that it'll compress down almost to nothing within the mouth. That's a good sign that a lot of the fiber has been removed. You can see this on the side of the box. And so you're left with this pretty much straight calorie and a carbohydrate. The other problem with a lot of the boxed cereals is, and you see this in almost all granolas on the market too, is that they will bake at very high temperatures, the granola and the cereals. This has a lot of effect on the fats and the oils. And I know with our Keto 3 breakfast, we show you how to turn that into a granola. And if that's how you like it, that's how you like it. We're not going to question that. It is absolutely tasty. We're not taking away from that. But I do want to show you here a way, because the thing about also granolas, it can take 20 or 30 minutes to actually pull it together. I want to show you a 2-minute granola that avoids any form of heat and any form of baking. This is the same Keto 3 formula in terms of not using grains, and we're not using high carbohydrate. There's very little carbohydrate in the Keto 3 formula. Take 3 or 4 tablespoons of it and put it into a bowl. Put 1/3 of a cup of milk, and don't mix it in. Just pour the milk in around the granola. And then what I want you to do is take 1/2 cup of liquid coconut oil, or 2 or 3 tablespoons, 1/2 cup, whatever you think you like, but it needs to be a decent amount, because what you're going to do is pour that over the cereal and slowly mix that in. And the coldness of the milk will begin to re-solidify the coconut oil with the fiber of the Keto 3, and it will clump up and clump together. And this is what's going to create your clumped granola, if you will. And over the top of that, once you've got that into the kind of clumpiness that you like, add more milk, add more berries, whatever type you like. And then a really nice touch is some cinnamon with that. And I think you're going to find you'll love this formula. It's really quick. It takes a couple of minutes. There's no baking, there's no heating. So all of those good oils that's in the formula are not going to get affected. You're not going to be impacted by any grains. There is none in this formula. There's a lot of fiber in this. There's a ton of protein in this. and a good calorie hit, particularly with you adding that liquid coconut oil in there. This is fantastic post, your morning training session. You're trying to get your calories back in. And like we said in the last Monday Mindshare, the medium chain triglycerides, which is high in the coconut oil, that is going to help you in terms of burning more carbohydrate. And it's also going to help have less effect on seeing any dilution or a lower dilution effect on your ability to maintain carbohydrate oxidation and metabolism. So this is a great form of fat, and we should be taking more of it. So hopefully these 3 ideas have given you some simple ways that you can move from classic drinks and snacks to simple, quick, convenient alternatives that are really going to help maximize fat oxidation all day, every day. And hopefully that works for you, and you can get into some of these, efficient fat oxidation levels that we see with some of our athletes like Matt. So with that, I thank you all again for joining Monday Mindshares. If you've got ideas or inputs, please feel free to add them, and we look forward to catching up soon. Thanks again. Talk soon. Bye.